Hello, everyone. This is Aussie's Elect, and today we are back to finally, after months and months of delay, talk about the Queensland state election, which is happening later this month in about a bit later than 2 weeks. I am here with a special guest. He has his own blog. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello, I'll be blogging on the PAC elections and helping out with the Queensland coverage today.
So I brought Mr. PAC along because he seems to know a fair bit more about Queensland politics than me, and he actually has his own prediction. But before we get to his prediction, I just want to look at the A forecast, which is back. It's finally back. I was wondering if the site would ever come back. Have a look at what they are predicting. Now, I actually got in contact with this guy quite a long time ago. I think it was probably around 2 years ago, and asked him what his deal is, and he said he was like some kind of like chemistry major or something, biochemistry or something. Anyway, like he has some kind of model to work this out, but he's obviously inclined to think that there will be an LNP majority. There's a slight chance there'll be like an LNP most seats or an LNP might, yeah, but he's basically saying that the LNP have got this. And if you go down to the two-party preferred, he thinks it's going to be around 55-45. And then we go down to the seat totals, he thinks that the LNP will get 55 seats, which is eight more than needed for a majority. So he very much thinks that the LNP have it in the bag. The LP will suffer a massive swing against them. There are some sort of contentious seats like Rockhampton, McAllister, which seems actually, yeah, pretty 50-50. McAllister, Rockhampton, a strong independent. Margaret Strello. Cook, another contentious one. The Greens are apparently ahead in McConnell and Cooper. Stephen Andrew, who quit the One Nation Party, has a decent chance, according to him, of retaining the seat for the Caddis Australia Party, but he has marked this one as unusual. How do you pronounce Capalaba?
Kapalaba.
Capalaba. Okay, thank you. Gavin is another one, which is kind of, I don't know, Ipswich West. They're saying that the LNP will probably retain it. So the person who's running for Ipswich is not the person who actually got elected that by-election.
The MP that was elected was just diagnosed with disease, so he stood back, and his office manager is running. Georgia Toft is the candidate tapped.
I quickly just want to talk a little bit about Keppel before we move on.
Will be an interesting contest just because obviously we've got James Ashby, who is Pauline Hanson's or One Nation's chief of staff, running, and I know he's running a really big campaign there. I know that's one of the target seats for One Nation. But you've also got Nigel Hutton, who was formerly on the Keppel Area Council, and he's running for the election as well. What I can confidently say about Keppel, I don't think Brittany Lauger has a good chance of retaining the seat. It might not be an LNPV One Nation two-party preferred, but it's one or the other that'll win.
Right. Well, this A forecast site doesn't seem to suggest that One Nation has much of a chance.
So in 2017, for example, One Nation was on the two-party preferred in Keppel. And if they have a result similar to that, I just think because of the high profile of the candidate, James Ashby, there, and the fact that One Nation is going to be putting a lot of effort into getting their Queensland state leader elected, I can see it being a tight contest.
So we've seen this prediction. You could go have a look at it yourself. I want you to go through the marginal seats and tell me which ones you think will be flipping.
Yeah, okay, so I'll just quickly run over the LNPs. I don't think that any LNP seats this election are up for grabs. I know seats like Currumbin and Coomera are slim margins. They've got multiple seats under 2%, which in a typical election would be contentious, but I think that they're fairly safe. I know their Youth Justice Shadow Minister is remembered for their most marginal seat. So I don't think they've got any problems in their own territory.
Currumbin is basically just on the border of New South Wales and Queensland. I know, at least federally, right on the other side of the border is the seat of Richmond, which is a pretty progressive seat. So I guess I can see why this part of the Gold Coast might be sort of marginal, but I don't think that's going to go to Labor this election. I want to talk a little bit about Gavin. So Gavin is this weird seat, which is basically in the middle of a sea of blue. I believe it's sort of like a lower socioeconomic part of the Gold Coast, and that's perhaps why it votes Labor sometimes. Do you believe that Gavin is going to go to the LNP?
Yeah, look, Gavin will be a very interesting contest. I think there is a high chance that Gavin could go to the LNP. Yeah, so the betting odds have Gavin, Liberal National, $1.45, Labor, $2.30. I mean, Gavin, it's on a 7.8% margin, and I'm just comparing with my previous research on electorate swings, and it isn't an electorate that has swung majorly in the past two elections. So if we consider this, it's still got a chance of being retained by Labor. I mean, considering the fact that it's a minister, she's a quite active minister. She hasn't been in her electorate much in this campaign season so far. She's been travelling the country, which implies to me that potentially Labor internal polling has indicated that Gavin might be safe for them to elsewhere because she hasn't been in her area a lot. So I still think, while saying theoretically it's an easy win for the LNP, and it'll probably potentially be an LNP win, there's still some doubt in my mind on that one.
So you've got like your own system. What percentage swing you say might be on in Gavin according to your system?
Yeah, so what I'm predicting is it'll probably be around a 5% swing. That area has been primarily impacted by things like 50-cent fares. Public transport's a big thing around there. They won't swing as largely away from the Labor government as they will in the regions.
So if you look at the map, you could see that in Brisbane, Labor holds almost every seat. These seats here, McConnell and Cooper, are the ones that many people are suspecting will go Green. What's your opinion about those two seats?
Yeah, they're definitely interesting. I mean, to my understanding, yeah, McConnell is the electorate of Grace, who's a very senior minister. Arguably the reason why Stephen Miles is the Premier right now and not Shannon Fentiman, but that's a whole other story. Look, if Grace lost her seat to Greens, that'd be very similar to Jackie Trad and how she lost her seat to the Greens. The Premier has spent a lot of time in McConnell, and he probably will continue. Grace is an asset that he needs in his government. She's a very senior minister. I believe she's the Industrial Relations Minister at the moment. But with things like the CFMEU debacle and in relation to industrial affairs, and I just think the rise of the Greens in Brisbane, particularly in the city of Brisbane, it puts her at a challenge. Yeah, as you said, McConnell and Cooper are the two seats to watch.
Yeah.
The Greens.
Yes, so there was talk of green slopes as being a possible green gain.
Yeah, there was an article where the Greens outlined their target seats, and it was Greenslopes, Cooper, and McConnell. Whether or not they're successful is another question, but just so we understand, the Greens' resources are going into those three seats to win.
Okay, do you think the Greens will win green slopes?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Well, that sort of tracks with, I believe, what AE Forecast says. Where do you think the LNP could get gains off of Labor in Brisbane? The seat that I've been hearing about is Aspley, which is the seat Campbell Newman won back in 2012 and then lost the next election. The whole thing, though, with Brisbane is that these 50-cent fares, as you talked about in the Gold Coast, they're a big thing, and that's what's keeping the LNP at bay from gaining a lot of these Brisbane seats.
Still with Aspley, though, on my predictions, they'll probably see a 6% swing there, which would deliver the Liberal National Party. Aspley. So I'd still think that's probably a gain there. I've got a very interesting opinion about Shannon Fentiman's seat. I believe Waterford, which is the Logan seat. And it comes back to that idea of internal polling.
Yeah.
And I think I can kind of tell when the Labor Party is sending their ministers across the state, that minister's seat in the Labor Party internal polling must be fairly good.
Okay.
But the fact that Shannon has spent nearly the entire campaign in her own seat.
Right.
They've just committed millions of dollars to the Logan Hospital.
Okay.
Because funnily enough, her electorate, despite being the health minister, was the electorate with the worst ambulance ramping in the state. I think, despite her incredible margin, something is off about the amount of time she's, as a health minister, spending in her own electorate. I don't think she'll lose the seat, but I think there is something that implying it'll be close.
So Redlands, on the other hand, that's one that a lot of people talking about are probably going to go to the LNP.
Yeah, I believe I've got Redlands. It's on a fairly slim margin too, about 2% from last time I remember. So yeah, you can nearly guarantee that'll go to the LNP probably by a fair bit.
Okay, so in northern Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast, the marginal seats we have are Pine Rivers, Redcliffe, Pumastone, Caloundra, and Nicklin. Do you think all of those are going to flip?
I think Nicklin is a Sunshine Coast seat that will flip.
Okay.
So Nicklin is definitely one to watch. I think it's on a slim margin as it is. Yeah, 0.01% margin. I see it'll flip to the Liberal Party by a fair bit.
What do you think about Pine Rivers?
I think the swing will deliver Pine Rivers for the Liberal Party. It's what I've got here. Redcliffe is another one of those marginal Labor seats that the swing I've got predicts that it'll flip based on the last elections and how that electorate swing differs from the statewide swing.
What do you think about Caloundra?
The slim margin I've got here, expect a 6.5% swing in that electorate based on that 9% statewide swing figure, which is an average. And that'll deliver the seat to the Liberal Party probably on a margin of 4 or above.
Just an editing note here. We didn't talk about Puma Stone, but we both believe that that will probably go to the LNP. I guess the big wipeout that we are expecting is in North Queensland for the Labor Party. You got a lot of seats here, like Cook, Barron River, Cairns. Mulgrave is not marginal.
Yeah, so it's going to be really interesting in the regions. I mean, we could either see a complete decimation of the Labor Party in North Gladstone, or we could see some of them hold on. If we look at it purely statistically, seats like Cook will fall to the Liberal Party, but looking at it from a demographic perspective, Cook is an electorate which I don't see moving away from the Labor Party. In saying that, in the 2017 election, Cook, mind you, this is the electorate that is the regional parts of Leichhardt, the Torres Strait, those Aboriginal communities, was on a two-party preferred ALP One Nation in 2017. So that's an interesting twist that it took in 2017. But I still was looking at demographically. I don't think Cynthia Liu has much to worry about as the Labor member for Cook. It'll be a tough contest. Theoretically, she's going to lose, but I think I've got a gut feeling that says that she'll hold on by a thread.
So I've also heard about Cairns, that despite the sort of small margin that the Labor Party are
Yeah.
on, people are expecting this to perhaps stick with the Labor Party. Can you give us some information on why this might stick with the Labor Party?
Yeah, so Cairns is a very interesting seat. So if I just look at, like I was talking purely statistically on what we can predict the electorate swing to be, it'll be around 5%, which is different to most regions, which would deliver a 0.06% margin for a Labor victory. And the betting markets also have Cairns. It's tightened a lot. It was like $1.40 Labor, $2.50 LNP. It's now $1.70 Labor, $1.90 LNP. It's an interesting seat just because Cairns has a growing progressive base because of the reef. It's an interesting electorate. Like if you look at everything statistically by the book, statistics and numbers, Cairns is gone. David Christopherly spent a lot of time in Cairns with Yolanda Enge, who's Warren Enge's ex-wife. It's interesting to see how Cairns will go. I mean, we've seen the LNP put a lot of effort, time, and leaders' time into Cairns, but it's still one of those electorates where it looks tight, it will be tight, but will it flip?
But a lot of these other seats, on the other hand, so I'm going to list them off: Barron River, Townsville, Thuringowa, Mundingborough, Mackay, Keppel, possibly Rockhampton, Bundaberg, and Harvey Bay. Do you think that these number of seats all have a good chance of flipping to the LNP?
Yeah, absolutely. I think all those seats that you've just mentioned will flip. I'm not so sure about Harvey Bay. Why I say Harvey Bay is because on my numbers, it's not very generous to the LNP when it swings, but it's very marginal, so it'll likely. I mean, looking at it, it's a handful of votes and you'll switch that seat. Bundaberg, I think it was won by like 8 votes in the last election. The Premier took an 11-minute private jet flight. What's interesting is those two seats you mentioned, Rockhampton and Mackay, they have been Labor, I think it's 92 and 118 years. So Mackay has never gone Liberal, and Rockhampton hasn't gone Liberal in something like 100 or 92 years or something. That will be a breaking news for election night if those two seats, which they are looking like they will, flip to the Liberal Party, the Liberal National Party. What is interesting about a lot of these seats is that still philosophy that the Labor Party is the party of the miner. Like these are mining seats, and there's still that the Labor Party is the party of the miners, which I know in modern day the Labor Party's kind of shifted away from that mining type workers in the mines standing up for type perspective and moved more away to that progressive standpoint. Although you could say in the Northern Territory it's a bit different, but here in Queensland, more and more emphasis from the Labor Party's policy has been on that renewable energy, which I think is finally getting across it negatively to those mining communities, which will be interesting. I know Mackay has the backbone of Labor's energy policy in the Youngalla pumped hydro scheme, something like $26 billion major energy policy, which they've pledged and, they're trying to push to Mackay. And whilst the LNP have said that they'll scrap the project. So that'll be really interesting to see how Mackay, do they take Youngalla or do they leave Youngalla? And I think that'll also be a question in Morani. Not that there is a possibility of a Labor game, but it's more the possibility of should they elect an LNP member who can then be in an LNP government to eliminate that, or will they elect a Katters or One Nation member who will then have to fight for it on the crossbench, if that makes sense.
So I just want to, in this part of the video, sort of discuss with you about like the difference in people's mind between the federal Labor Party and the Queensland State Labor Party. So a lot of people find it humorous that the Labor Party has maintained in power in Queensland for, I think it's like every term except for one since like the late 80s. And I know that there's some drag because of the reputation that Joe Bajelki Peterson made of himself back in his regime as premier for like 20 years, from the 60s to the 80s. But there also is sort of an idea that the Queensland Labor Party is different in its agenda than the federal Labor Party. And by what you're saying, are you suggesting that that like sort of line between the Queensland Labor Party and the federal Labor Party is like starting to blur, and people are not necessarily seeing them as two vastly different entities anymore?
Yeah, I mean, statistics are proving that more and more nowadays people vote the same federally as they do state. I think the fact that the disparity between how the Labor Party in Queensland has performed and how they've performed federally is just so crazy. I mean, it's like 15% difference. It's like, how are nearly a seventh of Queenslanders supporting Labor strongly in one election and the LNP on another election consistently? But it's just how it's been. I think this election, though, you'll see that shift back to the LNP just because I think that issue, I mean, it's not really an issue, it's just a policy stance. I mean, the Labor Party, renewable energy, they're moving to green, while a lot of mining communities in central Queensland that are Labor state seats, I could never imagine these seats ever becoming a federal Labor seat, but Labor state seats full of miners will find themselves no longer disillusioned by the Labor Party in that type of aspect. But that's purely central Queensland. I think that renewable approach and that green approach is going to help them in Brisbane, if anything. I mean, that's a growing green area, and I think they need to claw back some of that progressive voter base. They're stuck between two sides. Do they give up that traditional worker mining base in central Queensland and pick up that progressive vote they're losing in Brisbane? Or do they continue to lose progressive votes in Brisbane but maintain those central Queensland regional votes?
So basically, what you're saying is they might maintain Mansfield and they might maintain Green Slopes, but they will lose like 3 Townsville seats all in the one go, and as well as a handful of other regional seats.
I agree with what you're saying. The regional seats are going to go a lot more LNP than the inner city seats this election. It's not the sole contributor. Youth crime's a huge problem in Townsville, which is why I think those 3 Townsville seats will flip.
Crime was also probably the number one issue during the Northern Territory election, so I'm not surprised that you would say that. It would also be a thing in the Queensland election. I just want to quickly, we haven't actually done this yet, look at the polls. So it's basically averaging to be around 55, 56, 57% two-party preferred. I'd say probably the average in the most recent poll, 56-44, makes the most sense.
And if you look at the last election, it was 53-47 in favour of the Labor Party. 9%, I think it worked out to be change, which is what I've accounted for here.
Yeah.
A 9% swing away from Labor Party.
Obviously, a lot of this is just down to the fact that, there was that Palaszczuk effect last election with COVID and stuff like that. Like, it was definitely a different ball game to like a standard election. So a part of that is just that. But there obviously is like a swing away from Labor for other reasons as well.
And it'll be interesting to see how much anti-Palaszczuk vote this time. It'll be interesting to see how much Miles can separate himself from the Palaszczuk government. I mean, he's trying to, at least, which is ironic because he was the deputy premier, but he's trying, and I want to see how it works. That, yeah, I've got some belief that he might be able to pull it off. Not that he'll win the election, but that he'll not badly as Palaszczuk would have.
So I just want to be sort of anecdotal for a second. I watched a bit of the leaders debate, which was held the other day. I thought it was pretty boring. Maybe it's because I'm not from the state, or maybe it's just because I wasn't in the mood. I think it was at the airport or something, waiting for a flight or something. But yeah, I can say that Stephen Miles, I don't think he's the most charismatic guy. He didn't perform particularly smoothly in the debate. I believe Chris Foley comes across as way more comfortable in front of a camera. Did you watch that debate?
Yeah, no, I did. David Christopher won the debate from the panel. It's interesting. I think David Christopher, he's really, I want to know, is his small target strategy going to work? Health, cost of living, crime, housing, slogans. Do you think that'll work?
I mean, it worked for Albo, and I don't see why it wouldn't work for him. I believe they had a similar strategy in the Northern Territory, although that's like a much smaller entity. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work. And, you've got angry people now with cost of living, and interest rates are still high. So, there's that federal drag absolutely going on at the moment. So, I mean, 50-cent fares, it's I think it's a pretty genius policy, but I think people do kind of see it as a bit of a bribe, and possibly they see it as unsustainable too. The issue is that, this Labor government has been in for quite a long time, and people at least give them some responsibility for the cost of living issues that the state is currently facing, which is like the petrol prices, the power prices, the house prices, the food prices, all of which you could argue is like, just a federal issue or a global issue, but it doesn't matter. People have got their baseball bats out because their rent has gone up like 2 or 3 times. So they want somebody to punish. So it looks like Stephen Miles with his interesting grin will be the one that they'll be aiming their baseball bats at.
In Stephen Miles' defense, he has taken a much more different approach to Christopher Lee. He's not taking the safe small target strategy. Things like state-owned petrol stations, another state-owned energy company to rival the current one. They're all very interesting policies, and I know I don't think they're vote winners. I mean, who's going to say, "Oh yeah, no, state-owned petrol stations. That's all I've wanted in my entire life." That's definitely a different strategy to the small target of David. The debate was very interesting. Don't know how much it changed. We haven't actually seen many polls. I saw the Courier Mail poll, but you can't tell much from that. Fairly right-wing poll. It had David Christopher at 87%, Stephen Miles at 13% on who won the debate. David Christopher made the commitment, if the crime statistics don't go down, he'll resign. Which was an interesting thing that he held up against him for the rest of his career.
There was an interesting bit about euthanasia where Stephen Miles was sort of accusing Christopher of going to roll back the euthanasia policies because they voted against it, and Christopher committed that he will certainly, he doesn't plan to, and then like Stephen Miles is like, what, you don't plan to? You're doing an Albanese and saying you don't plan to. That's key for you're going to, and then Christopher straight away is like, no, we're not going to. So that kind of like was a punch in the gut to Stephen Miles. He thought he had him there, but I guess not. So straight talker fully, I guess, comes across as when he answers like that. So this is the prediction that I've come up with. This is not necessarily Mr. PAC's prediction, but this is my prediction. The LNP on 52, Labour on 32, Greens on 4, Katter on 4. I'm suspecting that they could retain Mirani, that the current member is popular enough. And independent, Noosa. I mean, this is a generous result for the Greens, and I guess it's a generous result for the Katter. I mean, I remember you were talking about earlier on that Katter could pick up Cook, but you don't think that's really a chance now, do you?
I think statistically it's a chance, demographically it's not.
Right, okay, I see, okay. Obviously, I think that there's going to be a LNP majority. As simple as that. I think the Labor Party will lose a ton of seats, mostly in the regions, but also a few here and there. The only one in Brisbane I'm predicting is Aspley at the moment, which is what Mr. PAC said. It's mostly in like North Brisbane, so the Sunshine Coast area, regionally, and then one in the Gold Coast area, which is Redlands. I mean, is the Redlands even really the Gold Coast? Do you even count that as the Gold Coast? No, it's more like south of Brisbane area. I don't know. That's this video. One of either me or Mr. PAC's internet for this video has not been great, so it has been a bit of a difficult one to record. But thank you, Mr. PAC, for joining me. I will definitely be back soon to discuss more happenings with the Queensland election, mainly the betting odds, because with the betting, currently we've only got 37 seats out of, what is that, 93? So what is going on, Sportsbet? Where are the rest of the seats? I want to bet on more seats than just 37. So I'll be back to talk about betting when that becomes more appropriate, if they do end up putting more seats on. I don't know how they're being so slack this time. Maybe people are making too much money on seat betting.
It's better than what we had. We were stuck with like 6 seats for the past 2 months.
That's true. Mr. Pack, thank you for joining me. Okay, his battery may have died. So, yes, that was Mr. Pack. Go check out his blog. He knows a lot more about Queensland politics than I do, that is for sure. I will be making a federal politics video again very soon. Goodbye, everybody.